Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to today's clinical design group meeting. Apologies again for the daylight savings confusion. Hopefully next month or the next 6 months will be all good, but thanks for everyone making their time. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all gathered here today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, acknowledging the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. Just like every other meeting, we will be recording this meeting and popping it on the website for those who need to leave early, but also those who can't make it. So if you don't want to be on video, please turn your video off. Thank you. So for today's agenda, it will be a really quick update around what we did in the last meeting, and then we'll have a data discussion around our outstanding topics for AUCDI R3. So that is an update to the implanted medical device summary, and then really delving into that functional assessment, so data to support that collection of functional data within a record, and then the next steps. Just a quick reminder, AUCDI really is specifying what of the clinical information, so what are the data elements and the terms that we need to be included for data entry, data use, sharing of information to support patient care. So that's what we are doing here in the clinical design group. And then there's the partner group, which is the technical design group, and they're developing out the AU core, which is specifying how that set of data should be structured, accessed and shared between the system. So they're building out the technical specifications for that exchange. In terms of AUCDI R3, we now our focus is around chronic condition management, so thinking about assessment scales and scores. We're looking at the encounter record as well as priority backlog items identified by the clinical design group. AUCDI is iteratively growing, so we know we've kind of grown from R1, R2, now in R3, and we know we are kind of pushing towards an R4. So our last meeting recap, we did an update on AUCDI, but we did agree on the head circumference vaping summary, implanted medical device, health assessment data group, and implanted medical device summary. So what that looks like here now is kind of like this. So the things marked in black are all the new things that will be in AUCDI R3, and I've just popped the white ones in there just to give it some rounding out so we give it some context. So you can see we've added new things to the adverse reaction risk, some new vital signs, and then the implanted device summary has been taken from the AUE request DI and brought into AUCDI with some additional content, and then the developmental milestones, medical device, health assessment and vaping summary. So this was the plan for AUCDI R3, and we've now ticked off something for child development. We've looked at the health assessment data group and worked through the priority data items, and we are looking at assessment of function today. So yes, the plan for today, as I said, is to look at that data to support assessment of function. In our backlog or in discovery phase, we do know that we're still looking at encounter record information. So that it will be our focus for our November clinical design group in person in Canberra. And we still have a couple of items that were identified as priority in our from the backlog from our last in-person CDG, and that's About Me and the procedure extension, which is clinical outcome. Those two just need a little bit more work. So we're working through what that actually means for AUCDI. So whether it makes it into AUCDI R3 or not, we still need to make a decision, but we're working through what do we actually want to include for AUCDI. And then just a quick recap of those data groups that we talked about last meeting. If you do have any further feedback, please let us know. Otherwise, they will be going in like this into our draft for comments. So you will be able to comment on all of these in the public feedback as well. So at the end of last meeting, we did send around by email and popped it on our LinkedIn as well, these data groups that were agreed on. But in case you missed it, we worked through the assessment, which will cover the assessment name, description, clinical indication, date of assessment. We've added the head circumference data group as well, and that will include both a birth date time as well as any point in time, date and time. A vaping summary. So this is just an initial vaping summary group to get us started. It's that first, just starting to start collecting something, and we can figure out over time what additional data groups, data elements we want to do in future AUCDI releases. And then we also looked at developed a developmental milestone summary. So one of the priorities that came out of the face-to-face clinical design group was to really start thinking about how child information or pediatric information can get collected. And this one is probably, besides the anthropomorphological ones, we wanted to have something that started to collect that developmental milestone information. So this is a repeatable model here that can be used to collect all of the different milestones and whether they've achieved or not achieved those. The last one that we did agree on was the implanted medical device summary. So this was taken from the AUE request DI, and additional things were added based on some requests from the community at the last CDG. You can see there's some additional details here, and it starts to bring in this repeatable model that's the medical device model. So that's that one there. We did receive a little bit of feedback. So as I said, we emailed out requesting feedback if there was any, and we did get some feedback. So Nai, did you want to take from here?
Yeah, thanks, Kylin. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, so on the slide, you can see that there's two little arrows. There's the implant body site at the root level, the parent level of the data group. And there's also the specific implant body site that's in the specific implanted device details. Now, we received some feedback from the TDG about being able to record, you know, if somebody has a total knee replacement, for example, we can record that it's in the right knee, and then we can record the revisions to that replacement if in the case of the future instances it needs to be revised at a later date, or a pacemaker, for example. However, if we've got an implant like a PTCA, like a stent, we need to maybe consider how we're going to record that in the electronic health record, because the location of the body site at that root level, which is the art or the coronary arteries, needs to have a specific location for an additional device that might be located in the same place. So I just hope you can, I'm trying to step you through so how we're going to record it very carefully. But it's important that we record that if we have the same body site where the implant's being replaced, so there's two devices in the same body site, we need to be able to record those separately. So we've just made an adjustment here. So the implant body site is the identification of the body structure or region where all the devices of this type have been inserted. So as I gave in that example, it's around the stent that might be like the cardiac region, for example, or the abdominal region. And then the specific implant body site gives the ability to be able to describe exactly where that implant is. So thanks, Colin.
So yeah, no problem. So there's just been a small update. So I guess to sum up, there's just been a small update to the model since the last meeting to accommodate the concerns that the TDG or it was raised through some members of the TDG. But if there are any other concerns, please feel free to email us, or you can raise it now if anyone had any questions or objections on this model or any of the models. Feel free to send them in, or if you want, we also have time now if anyone raised any questions around this. No. All right, well, we'll keep moving, but our inbox is always open. Feel free to have a chat to us either in person or on call or by email, but also we'll be out for public comment early next year as well. So that's when all the models will be published, and that's a really great opportunity to provide feedback then. So just in terms of working through now all of the community pictures that we received for AUCDI R3 from our last CDG. We've worked through them all besides the 2 that I mentioned earlier, which we're still kind of working through to understand what we need to do for AUCDI. So we've updated blood pressure with the body position. We've added regularity to the heart rhythm, well, for the pulse. For the adverse reaction risk summary, we've added the additional data elements. We now have a head circumference data model, a vaping summary one, and the device requirements have been folded into the implanted medical device and medical device models. So we've now kind of worked through all of the ones that were raised as priority, and would like to run this again probably early next year to look at what are the priority backlog items for AUCDI R4. So if people have ideas, start thinking about what you think from the priority should be included in AUCDI next. So I might now pass on, I think, Katie, to kind of explore functional status, because I think we found that it's not such a simple thing, is it, Katie?
No. So hi guys, my name's Katie. If you haven't met me before, I've just started doing some work with the team after a project that I did, which was looking at measurement tools that we use to assess functional status. So I've been working with Nye to look at this, and what we've worked out is that function is a pretty complicated area. So if you go to the next slide, it's when we're looking at the what and how to measure with function, it's complex to understand what the what is even. So what is it that we're actually measuring when we're measuring functional status? We had a bit of a brainstorm about what this actually was. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's more than just activities of daily living, for example. It can be challenging and messy to work out what's included. I think it might include things like communication, nutrition, ability to manage your own health conditions, ability to manage your medications, your ability to maintain social connections. So it's broader than just the traditional activities of daily living that we might think of as function, but how we actually define that is a bit challenging. And I think it might include broader factors and functional impairments as well, like things like cognitive impairment, behaviours, and certain bodily functions kind of really play into and contribute to functional abilities. So this was kind of just a slide to show our thinking of all the different things that might be incorporated in function, and how complex that might be. And so when you're looking at these different things, you'll see some of them look like they're activities, so like shopping or toileting or walking. Some of them look more like impairments, so like swallowing or grip strength, that sort of thing. And so it's how we categorize those different things, and how we kind of look at that when that function is so broadly defined. If you go to the next slide, in terms of how we measure function, I think that there are different ways that clinicians might measure function. We might observe function through our clinical assessments. We might get subjective reports of somebody's functional status. We might use physical tests or measures, and we might use standardized measurement tools. So that's like your scores and scales. And so I think when we're looking at those things, there can often be duplication around how we're actually measuring that across our observations and scores and scales and things like that. So if we go to the next slide, one of the reasons that, to give a little bit of background context, and one of the reasons they brought me in today to kind of talk a little bit about this, was that I've just recently undergone a project where we looked at the measurement tools that are used to measure function. And so the reason we did this project, if you go to the next slide, The reason we did this project, I guess I've been working clinically for 20 years, and the data around measuring function is quite fragmented. It leads to lots of inefficiencies, lots of frustrations for clinicians, as well as for the people who are having their function assessed. And so I think this project kind of grew out of an idea that better standards would mean better care, and that we could duplicate things less and give us more time for what matters. So it came from my clinical work, just wanting to stop collecting the same thing over and over again. So with this project, we did some paper-based research where we mapped out the functional measurement tools that were mandated or recommended in the Australian context. We also mapped the duplication across those different mandated and recommended tools. And we also did a survey of 269 clinicians across 24 different disciplines to understand what functional measurement tools that they're currently using. The focus of this was with older adults, but today we're looking more broadly across the lifespan, but I'll just present what we found with older adults. Next slide, please. So if we look at why I decided to focus on measurement tools for my project, I think measurement tools are widely used by clinicians already to assess functional abilities. About 66% of our respondents reported using measurement tools either often or always in their clinical practice. And they serve lots of purposes. They help with clinical decisions and care planning. They help us to determine funding or report against quality indicators. And unlike recording our observations in free text, these measurement tools often provide a way to collect structured, standardised and validated data about a person's function. And they often serve as a common language for assessment between providers. So that's why in this project we've decided to look at measurement tools as a place to start to better understand the data requirements and what was being collected about functional abilities by clinicians across both health and social care. So a lot of those tools are based on research, so it's kind of coming from a background of understanding what's currently being used out there. And the ways that clinicians are currently doing things, and then trying to build and leverage off that existing data structure and workflows to kind of co-design how we might collect this so that we don't have to duplicate things multiple times. So that's where this project kind of came from. So I'm just going to present some of the results just as a bit of background to the discussion today about how we assess function. So the first page here, if you go to the next slide, this is the results from our desktop research. So the desktop research, we mapped the measurement tools that are currently mandated and recommended in the Australian context. So this could either be by federal or state governments or by other national organisations like clinical registries. And then we looked at the areas of duplication across those mandated and recommended tools. So we looked at the what of what those tools were actually assessing. We found 73 different mandated and recommended tools, and across that there were 836 data items, and of those 261 of those data items were unique. So unique what we're recording. And so these are the most commonly recorded data items. So you can see across those 73 mandated and recommended tools, mobility is recorded 21 times, memory was recorded 17 times, and then you go down further and things are recorded less and less, and then there are some items that were recorded only once. So I've left the tail off that so that you only see the ones that were duplicated. So this, I guess, is a big problem. People are collecting the same data over and over again, and it also shows which things or the what that's most commonly collected across these mandated tools. But these mandated tools, they're only a subset of the tools used by clinicians. They're not always the most appropriate tools for a given situation. They've often been mandated for specific purposes like quality recording and that sort of thing. So they're not always the most appropriate ones to be used in a clinical context. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second part of our project was that we surveyed a range of different clinicians about the tools that they were currently using. So whether these be mandated tools or non-mandated tools. And this is a list of the top 50 tools. So we asked clinicians to record the tools that they were using. There was 355 different measurement tools that were reported being used by the 269 participants. And this shows the top 50. And of these, the top 13 of these were used by more than 100 of those participants, and the top 35 were used by more than 45. And there was also a really long tail of tools that were only used by a couple of participants. You can see on this slide the different colours represent the different professions here. So we had a whole range of different professions, and most of these top 50 tools are multidisciplinary, so not used by a single profession, but used across professions to help communicate. And down the left side, it shows the ones in grey, which are the mandated tools. The ones that aren't grey are the ones that are not mandated or recommended currently. So I guess this is just to show that there are a whole lot of different tools out there being used and commonly used, and they're collecting a lot of different data items, a lot of different whats and hows, and there's a lot of duplication between them. So that's kind of the background of where we started from. I'm going to hand over to Nai now. Yeah,
thanks, Katie. And I'm just going to share my screen. So if you can bear with me for 2 secs while I jump to the slideshow. Okay, and just get set up. Okay, can everyone see my screen there? Okay, so let me know if you can't see the screen, but yeah, it's really, really messy, isn't it? And very difficult to try and understand how we actually need to model functional status. It's very, very complex and it's very involved. So thanks, Katie, for going through your study. It's been really interesting to try and understand the breadth and depth of the tools that are used clinically, and also understand what is actually being measured. So Katie and I met up a couple of weeks ago, and we started to try and break down, okay, how do we assess function? And let's take the Bartel index, which is probably very common to a lot of you on the call today. You can see the items that are on the Bartel index. You're probably very familiar. And if we look at that and break it down, we can start to understand, okay, what is it we're actually trying to measure and assess? And the top 4 items in the Bartel index are feeding, bathing, grooming, and dressing. Now, they're activities, and we're looking at the level of independence that an individual has in being able to perform those specific activities. But if you look at the yellow circle at the bottom of the slide as well, we're actually also looking at toilet use, transfers, so bed to chair and back again, and mobility, so on all level surfaces, and the stairs. Again, we're looking at how independent the individual is to be able to perform that activity, or the capacity for them to perform it. And whereas when we start to look at bowels and bladder, which are the 2 items in the middle, we start to see a separation. Now, hang on a sec, we're not looking at how they're performing that activity. We're actually looking at the body function. So we're looking at, are they incontinent or continent? And we start to see that in a standardized validated tool, there's different concepts that we're trying to understand as clinicians when we are modelling. Sorry about the reminder for standing up, but I'm standing up, so that's good. And I just wanted to invite Katie to say, Katie, have you seen this sort of pattern happening across other standardised tools as well, where we're trying to understand the activity or the individual's ability to perform an activity, and then also looking at measuring or assessing the body function? Katie?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of the other kind of standardized tools have a combination of looking at somebody's capacity or independence across some activities, and then also looking at some of the impairments that affect that as well. So like some of the other functional tools include continence as well, or include other impairments like swallow or cognitive impairments, as well as looking at independence on certain activities. Some of the mobility measures combine a combination of independently walking and impairments in gait and balance. The falls tools can combine a combination of independence with certain impairments and things like independence with certain activities, and then impairments like unsteadiness or cognitive impairment or vision impairment. So I think it's quite common across these standardized tools to have these different concepts kind of all together in one tool, measuring an activity and the independence with that, as well as measuring certain impairments that kind of feed into that.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. So then I guess what we really need to do is understand what is the functional status, and we know that it's really, really complex. And in clinical practice, we need to understand how can we record this information. So we start by having a brainstorm, and we start by looking at how do we deconstruct the clinical practice that we do every day into specific clinical concepts. And we've seen by what we've just taken you through that we're actually looking at the level of independence in an individual being able to perform that activity. And that can be categorised by the capacity or the classification of the individual's level of ability to perform that specific activity. So from independence through to dependence, then needing support to be able to perform the activity. It can also include the degree of difficulty or the difficulty experienced by the individual to perform the activity as assessed at their capacity. And it also might extend to include things like assistive technologies or human assistance that the individual might need to be able to perform that activity appropriately or adequately. And by human assistance, we can identify that we might need to identify the number of humans that are needed to support that activity to be able to walk, for example. And we also might need to qualify exactly what that type of assistance is that the human assistance is required for that individual might need. And when we're looking at assistive technologies, we're actually looking at the identification of a tool, method, or system that's used to enable that individual to perform the specific activity. So really, when we're breaking it down, we're looking at the level of independence around those three qualifiers, and we're actually separating out the impairment as something different that we're going to measure later down the track. So it's something that we need to understand, but we're not going to break it down right now. And when we're looking at impairment, we're looking at how does the disability impact the individual's independence. So then we went from the brainstorm, we went to the research, and we looked at the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health. And they have two categories where they define body function, which measures the level of impairment. And that's the physiological functions of body systems, including psychological functions. And the impairments are problems in body function or structure as a significant deviation or loss. Whereas the activities and participation, in contrast, are measured in performance and capacity. And activities and participation include the activity is the execution of a task or action by an individual, whereas participation is involved in the involvement in a life situation. So the activity limitations are the difficulties that an individual may have in executing those activities, and participation restrictions are problems an individual may experience in involvement in life situations. Now, on the screen at the top right-hand corner, we've got a QR code, and that'll take you straight through to the AUCDI design principles. We've just got them there as a reminder, because when we're pulling the data together to model it, we need to reflect on those principles that we established when designing the AUCDI and establishing the role and purpose of it. And then we also need to reflect on tools that also measure independence or level of independence if we're looking at activities. And so we went to the functional independence measure, where the level of independence is categorised as no helper or complete independence, modified independence, and right through it the way through to supervision, moderate, maximal assistance, and total assistance. So we started to have a position of and making a modelling assumption that the level of independence in performing the activity, so that performance and capacity, and the body functional impairment or the level of impairment are separate clinical concepts. So if we're going to take a look at activities first. So this table on the screen actually helps us to try and break down the clinical concepts that we have in our mind around what is an activity, what is the body impairment that affects that activity, and what the problem or diagnosis might be. So I'm going to hand over to Katie, and she's going to walk us through this table.
I think we started to kind of separate out the different things that we were thinking of as function into whether we thought that they were activities or whether they were kind of functional impairments. And then down the side, we've also got kind of problems and diagnoses, which kind of sit beside this and feed into this as well as kind of like contributing factors to these things as well. So, for example, to separate out the difference between the activity or participation and the impairment, if you're looking at bladder and bowel function, for example, the activity might be toileting or independently changing continence aids or that sort of thing, whereas the impairment might be urinary incontinence. Or getting up multiple times at night to go to the toilet or that sort of thing. And so separating those two things out as separate clinical concepts when we're looking at the data groups surrounding them. And then the problem or diagnosis that goes along with that might be like stress urinary incontinence or bowel diseases or things like that. And then you go down that list and that kind of applies across different areas. So like if the activity is walking indoors, for example, body impairments might be that you've got pain in a particular joint or limited range of movement in a particular joint. You've got gait impairments or balance impairments or things like that feed into function but are a separate kind of concept. Similarly, with some of them, the functional measures, they look at things like at Swallow as part of a functional assessment. We've kind of separated that out as drinking is the activity or eating is the activity, and then the swallowing is an impairment that kind of feeds into that, but we would look at them as separate clinical concepts. And yeah, so similarly, things like cognitive impairment, which we might think of as a functional impairment that then feeds into different activities, such as driving or shopping or managing your own medications, that sort of thing. So we've tried to separate those two things out as different clinical concepts so that they each have their own data groups and ways of measuring them.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Are there any questions before we keep going, or happy to keep going? Okay, cool. All right, so let's move forward. So what we'd like to do today is propose a new data group, and this is an activity of daily living summary. And you can see on the screen, we've got our data group in the familiar colour, so the pink data group there, and we've got 8 data elements that form up the data group, so for the activity of daily living. Now, the concept description is the summary information about an individual's capacity to independently perform everyday tasks or actions, including participation in daily life situations. And the purpose is to record that information about the individual's capacity to independently perform a single activity of daily living, including participation in life situations. And the way we want to record it is to record one instance of this data group within a health record, and any changes or updates over time are captured as revisions to the original entry rather than creating a new entry. So on the screen, we've got the data elements on the right-hand side. They've got the white background and the orange circle with the white star. So we've got activity name, capacity, level of assistance, clinical description, assistance requirement, so we're talking about human assistance here, assistive technology requirement, and we've got a data element at the bottom, which is assistive technology details. Now, those brackets around it mean that we can slot additional information in if we need to, and are last updated. And this is the model that we're thinking could start us to be able to record functional or activities of daily living, and then we can broaden that as we need to. And you can see that we've got a roadmap here, which has the activities of daily living summary roadmap. And we've got other data elements that have the white flag with the grey circle, and there's little grey text on the right-hand side there. So we've got frequency of assistance, difficulty, barrier and enablers, any assistance description, assistance technology description, category, additional details and comment. So we've got some scope to be able to broaden out this data group if we need to. But what I'm going to do now is take you through each of the data elements and just provide a description for those. So the activity name is the specific task or action by an individual, including participation in a life situation. So we're talking about dressing or walking or shopping or doing housework, sports, participating in sports activities, socialising, or going to work, for example. And then the capacity is the classification of that individual's ability or level of ability to perform the specific activity. And the value set for the capacity reflects or is informed by the ICF, so those values that we had a couple of slides ago, and the FIM. So we've got a range from complete independence right through to complete dependence or maximal assistance, and then not applicable and unknown. So we're able to start qualifying the capacity of the individual to be able to perform that activity. And then we have a level of assistance. So the level of assistance identifies the number of people required to assist the individual with the activity, including setup, physical and verbal assistance. And we're proposing a value set there of none, one helper or more than one helper. So whether or not the individual needs no assistance to be able to perform the activity, or right through to they might need two or more helpers to be able to perform it. And then we've got a data element for a clinical description where we're able to put in additional qualifiers in around moving the way the individual moves. So it's a narrative description around the individual's ability to perform the specific activity, so that they move around in a wheelchair, for example, or can they only walk a couple of steps or to the letterbox and back again. And then we have the assistance requirement, which is the identification of the human assistance required to enable an individual to perform the activity of daily living. And for example, we can include things there like, do they need supervision? Do they need some physical assistance? Do we need to describe what kind of physical assistance they need? Do they need verbal prompting, for example? And then finally, we've got assistance technology requirement, which is the identification of a tool, a method, or a system used to enable the individual to perform that activity of daily living. Now, I'd like to just sort of to go through very carefully what we mean by assistive technology, because we're going to include devices, equipment, adaptations such as wheelchairs, hearing aids, prosthesis, speech generating devices, car modifications or adaptive utensils, trained animals that provide functional assistance, such as guide dogs or other service animals, methods such as compensatory techniques or task simplifications, systems such as a smart home automation or cognitive support applications such as medication reminders and apps. So with this definition, we wanted to include, it's quite a broad definition, but it enables us to look at what are those things that an individual will need to draw upon to be able to perform that activity that's mentioned in the activity name. And then we've got a slot for the assistive technology details where we're able to put in structured details about a tool, method or system used to enable an individual to perform an activity of daily living. And we've got a last updated, which is the date, time this ADL summary was last updated. So I'll just pause there for a few minutes to see if there's any questions. And I can circle back to the previous slide if you'd like me to.
There's been there's been a bit of chat in the chat. Oh, and
I'm sorry.
We need to all do a wellbeing break.
Yes, sorry.
And I think there's been a few questions around, I guess, why this rather than doing a specific ADL, like a specific, not ADL, a specific assessment, like a validated tool or assessment tool, and I guess how it kind of fits into the workflow. And I guess from maybe some of that comes from different perspectives and different points of view in terms of your way of practicing. So let me just kind of go through. I guess I can start that off in terms of, and I think Heather has also made and Katie has made some points there around, there are so many tools. How do we know which tools to pick? And what we really wanted to do was start with a foundational data group that could kind of be generic and could start capturing that ADL information and capture it in a way that is reusable if it can be. So it could possibly be used to pre-fill tools, but we do also understand that, you know, those validated tools, they do need to be asked in very specific ways. The way you're asking the question, the way you're recording that information, and when you're recording that information. But when we were developing this as well, we had a look at some of the aged care information systems to see how some of the nurses were charting and collecting this information. And for them, it was really important to understand like their independence level in doing specific activities around toileting, dressing, feeding, and understanding what the level of assistance is required. So some of it, yes, it is for funding reasons, or it is for a tool or an assessment that you're doing at a point in time, but some of it was supporting clinical care and clinical workflow. So, you know, it does come to some of that. And in terms of picking a specific tool, we were thinking that perhaps in the future, like in future versions of AUCDI, when we like have agreement, because I think that's going to be a really hard thing to agree between all of us, which tools do we start with, which ones need to go in there first, whether we do that, and whether or not they do end up in AUCDI, or do they end up as a form, and that the fact that we're just recording a score or the outcomes of those tools, we haven't quite worked that out. Because if you're doing a particular tool, filling in a particular tool for a particular reason, and then out of that comes specific interventions, it comes out specific diagnosis and comes out specific issues, are those the things that you want to be recording rather than the assessment score information, like the answers to all your questions itself? So I think some of that is, we need to understand that a little bit more, and this is a kind of first step to understanding some ADL information for AUCDI in an electronic medical record or a clinical information system. Chris.
Sorry to be a pain. I have written a lot there, so I think most of it kind of makes sense. I think the question is, and I get the problem, I totally get it. I mean, there's just so many of these, and my concern is that the problem is are we creating another one in a sense, and that's actually double handling then. Because, you know, like, why am I going to fill, like, I was filling out forms for an NDIS thing the other day and last night, and I'm doing it in my own time, and I'm not going to fill out another one. I mean, the only way it's going to happen is if it's automatically sucked out of what I've already done, you know, not me doing it again, because I'm not going to create it. No way, nobody's going to do this. So my question is then are we, my problem with it is I instead of creating a Frankenstein, I didn't want to put it in a nasty way, but my problem is, are we creating something in effect then, you see? So I think this is a really tough problem. So, you know, what is the goal of this? Like, is it just like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend the time to just fill this out, just inform somebody else in this format, when in fact I might use another usual evidence-based system at this moment in time. Yeah. So my question is and I think there is another serious question about whether it needs to be linked to funding, because that's where all the money is, if we could put it that way. So this is a really tough problem, and I don't know the answer. I'm not telling you I've got the answer, but I do think this is a huge thing before we make the decision about which way we go. But anyway, thank you. I've got to go. So I'll come back.
Okay.
I'll come back.
Thanks, Chris. I think you do make some good points, though, and even though you can't say to hear my answer, but I'll talk to you later about it if you don't get a chance. But I think that is a really good point. We are collecting this kind of data many, many, many times in many different tools, which I think Katie was saying. And I think that in the future, some of it could become post-populated back out of those tools into this. This is the way that it would be stored. It's not necessarily a form. It could be a form, but it might not be a form. But it's a way of collecting. And I think different professions have different uses for this kind of data, because I think in ED, they're using it for care within that space. And Jackie, you've popped something in there around allied health. I don't know if you wanted to mention something, talk about the purpose of it, or where you could see this working into the information you would need.
Hi, yeah, thanks. And I think maybe I misunderstood what Chris had put in the chat. I think, Chris, you're more sort of touching on, well, are allied health professionals already recording this information in this way, and can it be pulled across? Because why would they record it again separately in this way just for this purpose? So I think that's definitely a consideration, because no one has time for the double entry. We know that's why we're doing this work. So do the SIS systems that allied health professionals use enable it to be recorded this way and pulled across is really important. But yeah, I was just commenting that the examples of why this information is so necessary, and I think you've done a great job of breaking it down now. You've been through that element scenario. That makes sense to me. But your physiotherapist, your exercise sports scientists will be recording all of this information, and it's I guess so that they can see it next time and see progression as they work with people, as to is their level of assistance that they require decreasing as they get therapy, those kind of things. It'll help to measure progress towards goals in that way. But really why it's so important to have in a summary and available to others is because then when that person is transferred to an aged care home, for example, everyone in the care home can know this person shouldn't be mobilising without their prosthesis and a four-wheel walker and somebody's supervising them, for example, or they're going to have a fall. This is the only way we prevent those falls from occurring in those sorts of environments. Or, I've seen over my time plenty of examples, someone turning up at ED and the physio comes in and wants to try and assess their mobility because they've had a fall in the street. But the reality is that that person doesn't have their walking stick with them today because they went out in a rush and they've had a fall, but typically they do have one at home. So then we can know that and we're not repeating the work. So it talks back to those principles you referred to of the duplication and everything. If we already know what's the equipment they've got at home, we're not trying to issue them something else in the hospital to get it out. We just need to call the family and get them to bring it in. They're the practical reasons we need allied health to be able to record this information, and not for themselves, but to share it with everybody.
Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate that, because I think that's what we had seen a lot in the clinical information systems for aged care, and we had been also looking at the comprehensive management stuff that is happening in Queensland Health around collecting this type of data as well. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, Jackie, I think that's why they are collecting the data and wanting that to be available to all of the care team members to understand the needs for their patients.
Yeah.
Oh,
sorry. I was just going to say, Kylene, I think Jackie's 100% right. What we need to do is reflect back on those principles, because one of the principles is around quality and safety of care provision. And Katie and I, when we were unpacking it about what does a physio need versus what does a nurse need, we started to arrive at we really need to understand those themes, those key themes that we worked on before around, okay, so is the person actually independent or not? If they're not independent, then what assistance do they need, or what's the capacity that they have, and what devices, what assistive technology do they need to be able to perform that activity? And really, we're just trying to put together that base, that initial structure, I guess, of how the data might look, and then the how it gets implemented is that's for the TDG to talk about, which is what Kylene was alluding to earlier in the slides, is we're not trying to solve that problem. We're just trying to look at how do we get that information to be shared between different service providers. So say, for example, someone going from home-based arrangement to respite for a couple of weeks. You want to be able to communicate that information really clearly so that the nurse who takes on or takes the handover of that person going into respite has a really good understanding or a really good baseline to be able to then go, okay, I can care for this person and I know how to best provide them with assistance. Like, for example, if they suffer from sundowner syndrome, and at 5 o'clock they need some assistance, some human assistance to guide them so that they are able to be cared for appropriately in the nursing home. It's that sort of thing that we wanted to be able to record so that we can get it consistently within electronic records. So, yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention is that we did make sure it aligns with ICF. Katie and I have done a lot of work to kind of make sure that it does kind of align and make sense. And I think, was it Natasha, you mentioned something around NDIA picking ICANN recently. And while we haven't looked at ICANN, it is a proprietary tool, so it is a bit hard for us to access. We do, I think Vicky also put out there that ICANN is sort of based on or aligned to ICF or uses ICF as a base. And so, we're also keen to make sure that we are aligning. While we can't really say, like Spark can't really say where My Health Record is going, that's not, there's policy decisions that sits around it. We are trying to make sure that we are aligned with international standards as much as possible, but also aware of any other like really commonly used ones to make sure that our model can fit. And we are also very aware that our model can't fit all of the assessment tools. I think, Ray, you've popped in there something around looking at whether data from existing tools might map easily to the proposed values. And I don't know, Katie, if you had any quick thoughts on that.
So we took a whole lot of the different tools that looked at like independence and looked at how they mapped to this kind of proposal, and most of them mapped fairly well, but with different levels of granularity. So we looked at things like the IAT and the Inter-I, and we looked at the ICANN as well, and then we looked at the measurement tools that measured function in those 50 most commonly top used. And you can kind of backwards map them onto this. It's not exact, so you probably can't map it in the other direction. Like, you might be able to suck data from the tools into this potentially, but the problem with that is a lot of them are proprietary scores and scales and might not actually let you do that. But the other thing is sending data back the other way might be more challenging because those tools all have specific hows in terms of how they measure it. So different time frames or slightly different ways of actually posing the question, and they've been validated for that specific purpose. So I think the idea is that ideally we would want something that would allow us to take the information that had been collected in these different tools and things and take the data out of that so that we could summarize it in a way that's useful to everybody, and that would map, this would map to all of those things. It's challenging though because they're all so different. And so the ones that we've looked at so far do map fairly well onto this. Like, there are some places where it's slightly different, like the way people categorize, for example, setup assistance. Some people categorize that in independence and some in assistance, and it's just slightly different. But for the most part, you can map a lot of things. So we mapped from the IAT onto this, we mapped from Inter-I onto this, we mapped from we tried to look at ICANN and the WHODAS and things like that to map onto this, as well as some of the other commonly used ones. For the most part, it maps, but you can't necessarily then get a score from it, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Katie. Charlotte, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a really quick question. So a lot of the functional forms that people are filling in, will they be something that will be uploaded on the database once it's like I just wonder if people are entering, say, any of these descriptors here that you've got, like, will they be captured from the form people are filling in, or is this something they have to fill in like a double entry type thing?
I think that really depends on the functionality offered by your clinical information system, the system that you're using to fill in the form. I think we're trying to provide somewhere for that data to land if it is able to be pulled. This is not about the user interface. This isn't about like necessarily how you interact it with a system, even though it may look like that, but it is kind of describing how data should be stored. Like if you are collecting that data in a form, is there somewhere for that data to land within a patient's record in that information system? We're
Is
kind
that
of
something
defining
that the technology group is doing? Like, is that something that we have to pass on for comment or anything to the other group?
The technical design group as part of Spark is going, if I have this information, how do I exchange it? So if this information is present within a form, how do I transform it to something so that I can exchange it back into the medical record? How do I pass that information if it's been recorded already in the medical record, and if I want to pass it to another clinician, how do I exchange that information? So they're building out the technical specification there. I think if you are wanting to influence how your vendor system is, then they're the ones, because we can write specs here. We've got writing out, the clinical requirements around it and all of the parts around it that kind of affect the clinical data. The technical design group is looking at the technical specification for exchange, but then your user interface, your functionality, they're all designed by your vendor. And I think Sanjeev, you've just popped your hand up. Did you, as a vendor, did you want to say something, or as an individual?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I'd asked that questions, are clinical systems capturing such data, because I'm not aware that we are doing it. And that's something does get discussed at TDG, where vendors do put forward and bring forward their points of view based on their systems. So again, and this is going back to Chris's point as well. It's not just about ensuring that that as and when systems are able to capture this data, how it gets reflected, but are the systems even doing it right now? So
so we've seen it in aged care systems.
So we might have the specs for it, but the systems might not allow capturing such data right now. So
yeah, that's totally true. And so I think with what we are doing and what the technical design group, we're not mandating anything. We're saying, if as an implementer we want to start capturing this information, this is how we think it should be done. We have, to Sanjeev's question, we have seen this data being captured in aged care and in acute care, in the emergency area, as well as sort of inpatient. But I have heard, like Jackie was saying, a lot of allied health are collecting that information, but it is kind of maybe siloed off in tools. It might be in forms, it might be in their own systems. Whether or not they're exchanging it, that's another question. So yes, we have seen it being recorded in some systems currently. There's some more things in there, and I think we're really keen, Kim, to see how this does apply to the child information. I think Katie's been using a lot around, because of her background and all of her experience and expertise has been looking in the aged care space. But that's not to say we would like this to kind of fit all, and we do recognise that this is just a start. So keen to hear your feedback. Doesn't have to be now, might be when you have time to process it. But we're also happy to chat about it, because we're really interested to try and make it as broad as possible, but recognizing that it will never cover everything and all the use cases, but it is a start. Were there any more questions? I can see the chat's going off, which is amazing, and we'll come back and read through those. But did anyone have any other comments or questions? Adrian.
So one question's, obviously function can vary quite a lot from one situation to another situation. Like someone in hospital is quite different to in their home situation. Sorry. And also people sort of different clinicians come to different conclusions, and sometimes you want to understand how they came to that conclusion. So I'm just wondering if you need a comment field so that if necessary, clinicians can add in the basis that they've come to those decisions around specific capacity, specific assistant requirement, etc. For example, hearing loss, you could say, well, they had an audiogram which showed that their hearing the left ear was 50 and it was 50 decibels, and it was 70 in the right ear.
Yeah. Is it helpful, Kylie, if I circle back to the roadmap? Did you want me to do that?
Just one second. There is a clinical description, which Kim just pointed out. There is a clinical description. Would something like that be sufficient, or did you want a comment which
I think it's not good enough. I agree. I looked at that, but I actually think it's not good enough. Sorry to butt in because I've got to go. I think that is about the actual activity that we're describing, and what the person who was just speaking was saying is...
It's Adrian, sorry.
Adrian, hi Adrian, is that, okay, that is the description of what I'm saying here, but I would like to see it somehow linked to the fact that there is an audiology report somewhere that validates my, you know, level of assistance, etc., and the assistive technology that is now recorded here. So I get like there's a cross reference maybe. Is that what you mean? That's how I would think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. Maybe the roadmap.
Yeah. So I'll just bear with me while I circle back.
So and just one comment on that, because I also think that's how it would work in developmental pediatrics. It's like this as a core model makes sense, but its children have another dimension to function because their function is emerging. So I'd need to reference that this is an emerging, it's not just about updating it, because obviously this gets updated. It's about, all right, but I wouldn't expect a child of 2 to be continent day and night, you know, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, I gotta go.
Okay.
Thanks, Kim. I think a comment would be quite reasonable as a first start, and then as we discover out more details around how we could collect more clinical evidence, perhaps. What do you think, Nai?
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting point, and we can then have a more open discussion about how. Oh, sorry, I think Heather wants to say something. She just raised her hand. Yep.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm traveling and my internet is incredibly dodgy. Apologize. I think the notion of being able to describe what the evidence was is really important, but we can have a comment and we can have a description, but when you have both, it's like, what do you put where? And so in fact, the clinical description about an activity name is a way of describing why, how, what's the context around this. So in fact, I think that's the perfect place for to say this is what the tool was, if you like. In reality, there will be ways for implementations to be able to connect from one area of data being recorded to another one. And I think some of this is going to be implementation, but I think the fallback is probably the description. To me, that is where you say, I'm saying they're this level of independent based on this tool or this examination or whatever it might be that I've done. So maybe it's physical examination, maybe it's something else. But this is a way to describe clinically why you've made this assessment. The comment is kind of like the fallback for stuff that doesn't fit. And I think that's what I'd recommend. That's why we've only put one. If we put clinical description and comment, it's like, what do you put where? And people will put them in different places. So if that's acceptable, I just suggest we keep with the one kind of narrative area that captures all of these kinds of things around the context.
So are we saying we would like to add comment to our suggested?
I think we're saying we're going to, if we can, I think what Heather was saying, we could leave it with clinical description for now, if that's appropriate for everyone and acceptable by the CDG. And because otherwise we're going to have different places where the data elements are being filled for different reasons and different purposes. And then we start to, the scope starts to diverge and broaden. And really what we want to do is understand, that narrative. I'll just scoot through again. Let's go back to, okay, so we want that narrative description around the individual's ability to perform the specified activity. So you want to sort of qualify that in that particular data element. So I think it would be appropriate to put it there.
I think now in the roadmap, there was a section in the roadmap that we had specifically as like a slot that measurement tools could go into, so that if somebody had done a measurement tool that had that data item, that there was a slot that could feed into in the roadmap. I think it was the additional details slot in the definition of additional details. It was like, we want to pull in the actual measurement tools that this has come from into that slot.
Yeah. And I think, what we're trying to do, though, is this is just a first step. So we're just trying to really de-scope it at this point and really understand what are those key information components or elements that we really need to know, and particularly when systems are talking to each other. So around supporting interoperability, we need to be able to have that level of understanding so that, we're coming back to that principle of the design principle for AUCDI around quality and safety of care for that individual. We need to just be having that understanding of what is it that they need to be able to do and how independent they are in being able to perform that activity at a base level. So, yeah. And then we can expand on it later. There's always room for this to grow. And as we said, it can be refined at implementation at a later date. So are you happy if I keep going, Kylene, or would you? Oh, sorry, Adrian's got another question. Yep.
So just if you read what it says for clinical description, it says narrative description about the individual's ability to perform the specified activity. It doesn't say nothing about the evidence about how that conclusion came to. We need something where we can put that evidence in to support that conclusion.
And I think that's a really good point, Adrian. Maybe what we'll do is we'll take an action item or a note to say maybe we need to refine that description and circle back to the CDG at another time, because, yes, you're quite right. It doesn't have anything to sort of say that there's the evidence is there, but we can go and look at that offline. So thank you.
Were there any more questions or comments? We will go back to the chat because I know that people have put in a lot of things in there. So we will, after the meeting, come back to the chat and make sure that we are comfortable with everything that's put in there. So thank you, everyone who's put some things in there. So shall we move forward now?
Keep going. Yep. Okay, cool. So what we're doing is we're now going to focus on that assistive technology. And what we'd like to do is, if I just catch up my slides for a second, is just show you how we're moving towards the data reuse. And one of the things that we said initially when talking about AUCDI is around no data for data's sake, and being able to capture data that has an ability to be able to be reused in different areas or different data groups. So you remember that we started this discussion around talking about implanted medical device summary that has a slot for the ability to be able to put the medical device in that slot. And you can see on this screen, we're talking about assistive technology requirement, and we can, now that we've got the medical device with the device name, the UDI and the date of expiry, we can actually slot medical device into the assistive technology details. And that provides us with a level of flexibility and a level of granularity into going into that next layer down so that we can actually see what device was used to be able to help that person perform that activity independently, and any details around the device that might be needed in that particular data group. So that's just an illustration to show you how we're starting to bring the data groups together. And what I'd like to do next is put this up as a proposal, and we're going to jump to a Menti. So this is similar to what we did last CDG. So we've got the concept description, we've got the activity of daily living summary data group with the data elements on the right-hand side. So all of those data elements with the white star and the orange background are candidates for, or potential candidates for AUCDI R3. And yeah, we'd just like to jump to the Menti.
So if you go to menti.com, and let me try and find this QR code thing. Sometimes disappears. Where is it? But if you go to menti.com and then go to here it is. 77220885, or you can use the QR code and vote. So Agree with as is, and we will update the examples of the description so that to make sure that it's clear what it's for, but the model is as it looks. If you pop in here that you disagree, please let us know, either verbally put your hand up and let us know, or you can pop it in the chat and we'll come back to it. And same with minor changes, just so we know what the changes are that you're looking for. But really keen to see where you guys sit on the ADL stuff, because I think this is really new. When we were looking at it, we were looking far and wide internationally to try and find a model. But there isn't a lot out there, though we do see that it is being collected in systems, particularly in aged care and in the acute setting. And so it was really important for us to align it to things like ICF, and a lot of Katie's work has been pulled into this so that we can make sure that we fit as many use cases as possible, even though we know it's only a beginning. Does anyone need to look at the slide again, or is everyone comfortable with that? All right, well, we've got quite a few votes, so maybe I'll leave it there. Awesome. That's awesome. All right. Nai, did you have any more there that you wanted to?
No, I think we've come to the end.
Okay. Well, then, in terms of next steps, thanks everyone so much for coming to today's meeting. It was a new area and it was really interesting, and I think it was a really great discussion. So thank you so much for your time and all your expertise. Our next CDG is in Canberra on the 12th. There are still tickets available. We will be working through Encounter Record, the MVP for that. So what is the data that we need as an MVP for an Encounter Record? We'll also be giving you an update and around the GP Chronic Condition Management Plan MVP that we talked about at our last CDG. And just as a save the date, we're going to Hobart, so it'll be the final state to tick off. We'll be there from the 25th and 26th of February. The CDG will be on the 25th. We are planning an evening event on the 24th, but the details, we have not yet confirmed those, so keep an eye out. So once we have any information, it'll all be on the Spark website, hopefully soon. And I think that's all I've got for today. So thank you so much for your time, everyone. Really appreciate it. We've made some really great ground. So thank you, everyone.